Ted Bundy was born in November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, and died in 1989 in Florida by electric chair. Eleanor Louise Cowell, who went by Louise, was 22 years old and unmarried when she gave birth to her son Ted. Ted's father may have been Lloyd Marshall, an Air Force veteran and a Penn State graduate. Other sources had Ted's father's name as Jack Worthington, while some rumors had it that his father was also his grandfather. Because Ted's birth certificate lists his father as unknown, his biological father's identity may never be confirmed. Bundy's started life as his mother's secret shamed, as his illegitimate birth humiliated her deeply religious parents. To hide the fact he was an illegitimate child, Bundy was raised as the adopted son of his grandparents and was told that his mother was his sister. Eleanor moved with Bundy to Tacoma, Washington, a few years later and soon married his stepfather, Joni Bundy, and Ted took his last name. By an early age, he exhibited antisocial behaviors. He showed an unusual interest in the macabre at an early age. Around the age of 3, he became fascinated by knives. As a teenager, he wandered the streets looking for pornography and spied on women through open windows. He also had an extensive juvenile record for theft that was dismissed when he turned 18. Ted Bundy's IQ score is 136, which is considered as a gifted person and in the top 2% of the population in the world. He is also considered to be one of the most intelligent serial killers of all time. Bundy graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in psychology in 1972. He had been accepted to law school in Utah, although he would never earn his degree. While a student at the University of Washington, Bundy fell in love with a wealthy, pretty young woman from California. She had everything that he wanted: money, class, and influence. He was devastated by their breakup, and many of Bundy's later victims resembled his college girlfriend, attractive students with long, dark hair.
On this slide, we are going to talk about the internal and external factors. When looking at internal factors, some factors that could have predisposed Ted Bundy to commit the crimes he committed was that when he was a kid, he was antisocial and socially awkward. Ted Bundy was shy at a young age. When he was a kid, he was also much of a loner. Another internal factor was that he was teased for having a speech impediment, making him not being able to keep up with his fellow peers. For external factors, his family was one factor that may have influenced Ted Bundy to commit the crimes he did. He never knew his biological father. Also, Bundy began life thinking Louis was his sister, when in reality it was his mother. He also had a grandfather who was abusive, sexist. He also had a raging temper and a bit racist. Bundy admired and respected his grandfather and saw him as a prime example of a man. Also, he had a new man in his life, but refused to bond with his stepfather. And when Bundy's mother and stepfather had more children, Bundy continued to withdraw from his family. When Ted had to move from Philadelphia to Seattle, it upset him as well. The last external factor is his addiction to violent or torture pornography, which developed his compulsive behavior that fueled the terrible crimes he committed. And the only way he could climax was making his fantasies become a reality. Going into the next slide, Ted Bundy was known as a power control serial killer. The motivation was to dominate his victims. For Bundy, he enjoyed torturing his victims and found it sexually arousing. but for him, the act of murder was his most satisfying, as well as the final expression of power and control over his victims. Him having necrophilia eliminated unwanted rejection, so it allowed him to return to violate his victims whenever he pleased, letting him have that sense of domination. Ted Bundy was known to be diagnosed with multiple disorders. He interviewed with multiple investigators, doctors, and reporters in his last days that all attested to the fact that he suffered from multiple mental diseases and disorders. In any capacity, we can attribute that anyone who has the mindset to go about and commit murder may have some sort of mental instability, but Bundy's mental state was heavily impacted and showed clearly throughout his actions. Prior to Bundy's apprehension, he had never seen a therapist. That is, until he was court-ordered to see one to determine his violent inclinations. Since then, many psychologists have studied Bundy to evaluate various mental diseases. Since committing his crimes, Bundy has been claimed to have the following: antisocial personality disorder. A 2007 study showed that several Kentucky psychologists believed Bundy was the perfect prototype for ASPD, as he checked off all the criteria for the disorder. According to their study, Bundy was egocentric, lacked empathy and remorse, an antagonist, compulsive, and irresponsible. The next disease that Bundy was said to have had was psychopathy. Many people correlate psychopathy to ASPD, but they are not the same. Psychopathy does fall on the spectrum of ASPD, but not all people who have it are also psychopaths. Nevertheless, all psychopaths have ASPD. The symptoms of psychopathy that were seen prominently in Bundy were superficial charm, untruthfulness, insincerity, and motivated antisocial behavior. The next disease was narcissistic personality disorder. Bundy also showed signs of having NPD as he checked off at least 5, if not more, of the qualifying symptoms, such as excessive reference to others for self-esteem, cannot recognize needs and emotions of others, a feeling of entitlement, superficial relationships, and admiration seeking. The next disorder was bipolar personality disorder. During his trial, a New York psychiatrist named Dorothy Lewis attempted to save Bundy from execution by way of mental defect or disease due to him suffering from bipolar disease. Her grounds for doing this were Bundy's extreme mood swings. An article from Women's Health magazine quoted a time that Lewis also took notice to the way that Bundy would switch from euphoria and compulsive talking to anger, followed by long periods of sullen silence. The next disorder was borderline personality disorder. The same group of professionals from Kentucky also noted that they were more than sure that Bundy suffered from BPD. However, some had their doubts as they noticed that Bundy did not intensely feel his emotions. Other symptoms proving that he did have BPD have included unstable personal relationships, self-harming behavior, and going through intensive depressive episodes. The next disorder is schizoid personality disorder. SPD is commonly confused with schizophrenia. However, it is extremely different, as those diagnosed with SPD have a clear outlook on life and are very in touch with reality, whereas those with schizophrenia experience intense hallucinations and delusions. Bundy was said to have SPD because he made sense, was in touch with reality, was socially isolated, and extremely antisocial. The last disorder was Machiavellism. Bundy was said to have had this disorder because he craved dominance over his victims. His lack of remorse showed that he viewed others as an ends to a means. People who act this way on an extreme level are known to have Machiavellism, which is extreme narcissism, the will to deceive and exploit others for personal gain, and see people as objects for manipulation.
When it comes to the details of the crime, no one knows exactly where and when Bundy started killing. His number of victims is unknown, but he did admit to killing 36 women. His murders took place in different states such as Washington, Colorado, Utah, Oregon, Florida, Idaho, and Vermont. He also preyed on a specific type of women, All his victims were younger and attractive white females with similar characteristic of long hair parted in the middle, brunette, slender, and single. Since he was a cunning and charming young man himself, women did not see him as a threat. For almost every crime, Ted Bundy had the same pattern. He would prey on these women with a ruse, often wearing his arm in a sling or his leg in a fake cast and walking on crutches. He would then use his charm and fake disability to lure unsuspecting women to help him carry books to his car or to unload objects from his car. He would also sometimes impersonate authority figures such as police officers and firefighters. Once they got to his 1968 tan Volkswagen Beetle, he would strike them over the head with a crowbar or pipe. He would then drag his victim into the car unconscious and also immobilize them with handcuffs inside the vehicle, to which he had the passenger seat removed and stored in the back seat or trunk, leaving an empty space on the floor for his victim to lie down out of sight as he drove away. He would then take them to a location of his choice to rape, sexually assault the victim, and strangle or bludgeon her to death. He would then prolong the events by returning to the corpse at their dump sites or even taking them home to gain further sexual gratification, which is referred to as necrophilia. In some cases, he even decapitated his victims and would place their decapitated heads in his apartment and slept with their corpse until the decomposition of their body made it unbearable, to which then he would go bury his victim. Although Bundy had an extensive juvenile record before the age of 18, he was finally arrested for the first time on August 16, 1975, in Utah after fleeing from a patrol car. A search of his vehicle yielded masks, handcuffs, rope, and other items, but nothing definitively linking him to the crimes. So he was released but remained under constant surveillance until he was arrested again for the aggravated kidnapping of Derange, which led to his first trial in Utah on February 23, 1976, and he was found guilty and sentenced to a 1 to 15-year jail sentence in Utah State Prison on June 30, 1976. He was then tried again for the murder of Karen Campbell on October 22, 1976, which led to his extradition to Colorado in April 1977. Since he chose to represent himself, he planned his first escape and was able to escape custody for a week and was later recaptured. He then escaped again for a second time on December 30th, 1977, which gave him an opportunity to strike again at a Florida State University sorority house on January 14, 1978, and 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. His second trial was in Miami, Florida on June 25, 1979, for the attacks and murders on the sorority girls, after he was apprehended for a traffic violation on February 15, 1978, to which he was found guilty and sentenced to death twice by electric chair. His third trial then started on January 7, 1980, related to the murder of the 12-year-old girl, to which he was also found guilty and sentenced to another death sentence by electrocution. The day before his electrocution, he admitted to the murders of 36 women, so on January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy died on the electric chair.